This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.
Africa's richest man, Aliko Dangote, has questioned the ease of doing business in Africa after needing 35 visas to attend an investor summit in Rwanda. Mr. Dangote was speaking in Kigali and stated that his experience is in stark contrast to a French visitor to the East African country who did not need any visa. Now, Mr. Dangote's comments have raised questions about the validity of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreements and highlighted the challenges that Africans face when traveling across the continent. Joining us this morning on the conversation is international affairs commentator Mr. Collins Nweke. Mr. Nweke, good morning and thank you for joining us on the conversation.
Good morning to you, Stephen. Thank you for having me.
What is your reaction to these comments out of Africa's richest man?
It was very thoughtful, smart, and well coordinated highlighting of a problem that everyone is very much aware of. We talk about them in our own little insignificant voices, and so no impact is created. You and I are talking about this now because Africa's richest man, Aliko Dangote, highlighted the matter, and he is actually achieving the result because that was the CEO's forum where he made that comment. He had the attention of presidents who may before now be pretending not to be aware of the problem, but by highlighting it in the high-profile manner that he did, one can only hope that the scope will now expand, because so far there are only 4 African countries that allow free trade, free movement of people within their countries. Nigeria, the so-called giant of Africa, is actually not in that list. Ghana has just recently joined them. So yes, it's a welcome development that is being talked about, and one can hope that it could now be taken up and indeed simplified in terms of the movement.
Well, Mr. Nweke, if you remember, ahead of the signing or just before the signing of the Free Trade Continental Agreement, Nigeria was, if you like, it did drag its feet. It had certain concerns that needed to be met. And the comment that Mr. Aliko Dangote made was really around trade more than movement. I know you can't separate them, which was what led him to follow that statement with a need to strengthen regional markets. Can you speak to us on what you've seen? Regional markets already exist. We've got ECOWAS on this side. To the east, I forget the acronym that they use, but in East Africa, they have their market. In West Africa, there's their market. In North Africa, same thing exists in Central Africa. So speak to us on the efforts since the signing of the agreement towards strengthening these regional markets, as he said.
Nabila, there have been no efforts. What we have had is series of excuses as to why it cannot happen. Now, because it is happening already in 4 African countries, well, 5 now because Ghana just joined, tells us that it is doable and that these countries have seen the benefits. Yes, people can make decisions between business travel and private travel, but you see, private travel probably situates itself within tourism, and that is something that Africa needs. So that distinction, of course, is unnecessary. Africa Free Trade Agreement is on paper, but in many areas, in many ways, it has not been implemented. And you also have to look at some of the infrastructural factors that is actually preventing free travel. But I think the biggest bane of free movement of people within the Africa continent is bureaucratic and administrative challenge more than any other thing. And the time has come for them to actually begin to think more purposefully about it, because in the case of Nigeria, it could be that at the time we had a president that was a very, very undecisive, he has an undecisive personality. With a president that is more decisive, perhaps Nigeria can actually take the front row seat in some of these decisions, particularly as they concern Africa, because Africa is supposed to be the main focus of Nigeria's, foreign policy.
Free movement doesn't guarantee that the trade area will be fully actualized. However, do you believe that this is a first step?
Well, it is. It can be. And as far as I'm concerned, it shouldn't be a matter of this or that. It has to be a matter of this and that, So which means that, rather than making these unnecessary, distinctions, free movement of people remains free movement of people, whether it is for business purposes or for personal purposes, which, like I mentioned earlier, may include tourism. It could be for cultural reasons and all of that.
Well, Mr. Nweke, the thing is, despite Mr. Dangote's statement, these African countries do have legitimate concerns. And one of the most immediate concerns they typically raise is security. Multiple countries on the continent are facing internal issues and regional issues that have spilled over across borders. So don't you see this as perhaps a valid argument for why it is being slow to see a full actualization of the AfCFTA?
It is a challenge, but Nabila, I can assure you that it is not an insurmountable challenge, because if you have Interpol, which is the International Police Force, AfriPol should work perfectly as well, and that brings me back to the earlier point that I made. Terrorism, yes, is an issue. Security is an issue. But I think what we're dealing most with is, bureaucratic challenges. Because if there is, an efficient exchange of information, inter-police exchange of information intra-Africa, well, they will be able to do that. Now, we are not in the Stone Age. There is something called technology with which, they can harmonize information about, the troublemakers, so to speak, within Africa, because some of these people are supposed to be known to the, to the police, for the national police force, and then a unified, operational standard that all African countries can relate with. Now, I'm not trying to, kind of simplify the issue to make it look, more simplistic than it actually is, but I'm simply saying that the challenge is there, but it is surmountable, but they've got to make work out of it rather than looking for excuses to justify, the bureaucratic lapses.
Mr. Nweke, thank you very much for your time and your expertise on this conversation.
Always a pleasure, Stephen. Thank you for having me.
Mr. Collins Nweke is an international affairs commentator, and he joined us this morning to speak on comments that have come out of Rwanda, where Africa's richest man, Aliko Dangote, talked about his need for 35 visas to attend an investor summit in Rwanda. This, of course, he said, is concerning because of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreements that is supposed to allow businesses to operate within the region without as many hassles as Mr. Dangote has pointed out that he faced.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.